Hi everybody, welcome back to Beats and Bobbins. For those of you just joining, my name is Evan Roth. I'm a visual artist. I make a range of work from installations to video. I make net art, painting, I do photography. I've been doing textile works. But this tutorial series is about what I do here in the studio after hours, mainly related to music making projects and sewing tutorials. So today in this episode, we are going to be making these DIY headphone covers. These can be great if you've got headphones where the pads are starting to fall apart, or if like me, just something you're wearing every day and you want to add a little bit of something custom to them. So they're going to look something like this. For those of you that were hoping for more of a music related episode, I promise I'll be back for that in the next episode. So let's jump into it. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a thank you and to point to Stephanie Rublitz's video on DIY headphone covers. The covers we're going to be making, I learned from watching her videos. And in fact, if you're working with stretchy fabrics, I would encourage you to watch her video, which I'll link to in the description below the video. But if you're like me and you've got a lot of more regular cotton, non-stretchy material laying around studio, that's what we're going to be working with today. And besides that, all you're going to need is a little bit of elastic, a little bit of cotton fabric, and we'll be ready to go. First thing I'm going to do is just trace the outside of this. So I have a ledge here, a piece of paper. I'm going to stick the earphones over the table, onto the paper. I'm just going to trace the outside of this. We have our circle here. Next, I'm going to just rough in a 1/4 inch seam allowance around this circle. So there we go. Yes, we could make this look prettier with a compass. I don't have one in the studio now. You might not either, so we're doing this without one. So now we've got our outer cup size with our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next thing we're going to do is measure this inner opening so we can make a hole for that. Mine is about 1 inch. So you can either just rough this in or look for something that's about 1 inch. I've got this spool of thread that's just about 1 inch, so I'm going to use that as my guide here. Okay, so now we've got our 1 inch hole. Doesn't have to be perfect. So now we're going to take 2 measurements. The first is going to be the circumference of our headphone. Getting 8 1/4 for that. And the next is going to be from this edge to where we want it to lay, which is going to probably be this crease here. So I'm going to measure from here to here, and I get about 1 3/4 inches. And to this one, we're going to add a 1/4 seam allowance. So for me, that's going to be 2 inches and 8 1/4. So I'm just going to draw this rectangle 2 inches by 8 1/4. So now you're just going to need to cut 2 of these and 2 of these. So this is the pattern that I'm going to be using. I'm going to just fold this over the dimension of the headphone and trace in my 2 fabric cuts. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut those out. The next thing you're going to want is just a square shape, a rough square that can cover this circle. So we can just rough those in here. So then you should have your two earphone covers, the two squares that are slightly bigger than those, and then your two side pieces. Here we have our circular earphone cover face down on top of our square that's face up, so it's image to image, and we're just going to stitch around that pencil line of the inner circle. So I'm just going to lightly pull up on the foot and push down in between each stitch just because the circle is so small. And so now I'm just going to cut as close as I can to this stitched line here. Then we're going to push the square through the circle. And when we lay this flat, we're going to get a nice inner seam along that circle in the middle. And now we're just going to add a top stitch around that inner circle. Next, we're going to trim away the square piece, which is the inside. You won't see this seam, so we're just going to trim pretty close up until that stitch line. Next, we're going to put a 1/4 inch seam on these ones. So just measure out 1/4. And sew in that seam, leaving enough room so that the elastic can pass in the middle. This is the thinnest elastic I have in the studio, so I'm gonna try to make this work by cutting it in half. If you have thinner elastic, you won't need to do this step, but I'm just gonna cut enough to make sure it'll go through here. And I'm gonna just try to cut this in half, and we'll see if this works. Okay, so now I have 2 strips of elastic. And what we're going to want to do is use a kind of blunt needle and use that to pass this through our seam here. So we're going to try to get this elastic through here. So ideally you could thread your elastic through a non-sharp needle in order to get it through. Mine's too thick, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of a hack here. I'm going to tape my elastic to the needle. Okay, so now I've got my elastic to the needle, and I'm just going to try to work it through this seam. So the next thing we're going to do is just slide this around this inner portion of the headphone to see if it's going to fit. We're looking for something that's going to be tight enough to stay in place, but loose enough that we can also slide it over the edge. And so that feels pretty good. So now we're going to go put these seams together and sew a line down here. And now's a good time to make sure that this is going to fit over top of your headphones. You can just do a test. All right, so we can see that it's nice and tight, and it's going to stay in place. So that feels pretty good. Now we can go ahead and cut off these extra elastic pieces. So now we've got our two pieces. We're going to turn this inside out. We're going to put this face down, and you're just going to align the edge like this and start to put a 1/4 inch seam allowance and just work all the way around that until it's totally closed. So on my first attempt here, I had too much fabric to close that gap, which means that I think this circle is a little bit too big for this base. So I'm gonna undo this stitching on this one. I'm gonna come back and just trim away a little bit at this circle and try one more time to see if I can get it so that it fits this shape a little bit better. So then we're just going to turn these inside out. And then we're going to work them around here and try to push the padding through. They should be pretty tight and snug. And there we've got them, our new headphone covers ready to go. And so with that, hopefully now you also have your own pair of DIY modified headphone covers. If you end up making some, please send me a photo. I'd love to see them. Otherwise, thanks for watching Beats and Bobbins, and I'll be back with another episode soon.